I received this full-size junk journal for Christmas, and it gave me the idea of making a miniature version for a dollhouse. This particular journal has really interesting pages with a collage effect, so I'd like to replicate that for the miniature version as well. I'm making my miniature junk journal entirely from scratch, but to avoid having to measure for the cover, I'm using this 1/12 scale book to keep it in scale. For those of you who'd like to make your own junk journal, I'll leave all the dimensions in the description. I cut the book cover for my junk journal to be the same height as the book and a little longer on the ends. For the flap on what will ultimately be the back of the book, I'm cutting off the corners and folding the end under to get a clean finish. The front cover has about 1/4 inch of paper overlapping because I want it to wrap around like the inspiration journal. To create the inner pages of the journal, I'm using a variety of lace, paper, trim, and ribbon. To keep the journal interesting and give it character, I'm not using any blank or lined pages in it. To reinforce the strength of the spine, I'm adding a strip of paper. This will also make it easier to glue the pages in later, since the inside of this piece of paper I used as the cover is pretty smooth. To make sure I keep the pages an appropriate size, I cut a simple template and I'll cut all the rest of the pages using it. I'm like the MacGyver of coming up with ways to avoid measuring. I like the pattern of this paper, but it's a little too shiny and vibrant, so I'm using a nail file to dull it down. To avoid having any blank pages, I'm gluing patterns on the underside of every piece. There will be a lot of colors and patterns in this junk journal, so to keep it from looking too chaotic, I'm trying to stay in the same color family and stick with a softer palette. As well as colors and patterns, I'd also like to add texture to the junk journal, so I'm adding a little piece of trim to the edge of this page. So far I've made these 2 pages and I cut a 3rd page. I'm using this paper that looks like newspaper print to cover the blank pages inside of it. I got this bag from a local store when I bought some rocks, so I'm using it to add some detail to the yellow page. Right here it has a nice texture on the edge of the bag and has the word cook, so I'm using that to add a little pocket to the page. You could also use your printer to print out your own words and graphics to add to your junk journal. I'm filling the pocket with some more scrap paper. For the other side of the page, I'm using the newspaper print to make a bigger pocket. To make sure the pocket can be used, I'm adding glue just to the very edges of it and only a small amount. I'm adding another piece of scrap paper and I'm letting it hang outside the borders of the paper, just like the inspiration junk journal. I want the pages to look really full and whimsical, so I'm using this larger piece of paper and cutting out a small part of the pattern. For some detail on the front page, I'm adding a small piece of lace to the lower left corner. To make a 4th page, I'm minimizing the vibrancy by sanding it and adding some lace to the back of it. I found this little scrap of ribbon on the sidewalk and put it through the washing machine. I'm gluing a piece of the ribbon at an angle across the page so I can tuck something inside of it. All of the glue attaching the ribbon is on the back, and I can cover this up later with some scrap paper. I'm using one of the photos from these antique tin type photos to fill the ribbon. I just realized this packet of photos is from 1981. The word photos coordinates well with the bird page, so I'm adding it across the top. For more color and texture on the lace page, I'm gluing on a piece of this rope trim. But the glue didn't dry instantly and got stuck to my thumb, so I decided it looks better without it. Inspired by the floral print of the paper, I dug out this little stash of flowers I have. Since I make so many things from scratch, I tend to save little scraps because I feel like I'll eventually use them. I was initially thinking of using this on the inside page, but then I realized it would look better on the cover. I'm sanding the shiny paper of the cover so the leaf will stick better, and I realized I should sand all of the edges of the paper to get rid of the harsh cut lines and make them look more organic. I'm attaching the crepe paper leaf with lots of glue, which kind of comes back to haunt me later. I realized when I close the front cover it obscures some of the leaf, so I'm using a scrap piece to fix it. To make sure I glue the piece in the correct position, I'm adding all of the pages and clipping it shut. I still have more embellishments to add, so the pages will get a little thicker, but this will be close enough. I found these smushed paper flowers at the bottom of a box of miniatures, and I'm using one of them to decorate the newspaper page. The flower has a wire stem, so I'm using my X-Acto knife to make 2 slices to put the stem through. To make the slice big enough to fit the wire stem, I'm putting a sewing pin through it. I added some lace trim to the bottom left corner and a lace pocket for the right side of the page. For some fast and easy detail, I'm adding a simple pocket to the back of the page using the corner of a business card. I initially planned to use one of these little fabric flowers on the inside of the book, but I decided it would look a lot better on the cover near the leaf. To make sure the flower stays, I'm sewing it on using a bead. Since I don't have any yellow thread, I'm using white thread and coloring it with a Sharpie. I knotted the thread and put it through the book cover so the knot's on the back. And then I added the flower and then the yellow bead. And then I realized the bead wouldn't fit over the needle, and try as I might, neither the metal nor the glass would give. So I accepted defeat and removed the thread and needle. This time I'm checking first that the needle can fit through the hole of the bead, and now I'm sewing the flower on the book. I've run into some minor book flap drama, so I trimmed a little off the edge so it can close without touching the flower. At this point in my crafting journey, I was surrounded by a miniature mess and realized I had added all of this bulky detail to the back of the book. Moving the flower to a new cover would be easy enough, but somebody had used a ton of glue on the paper leaf, so that was hopeless. I couldn't come up with a solution, so I decided to just zoom in and carry on crafting. I added all of the pages to the book and realized it was a bit too thick, so someone has to go. The antique lady found a new home, and now the book closes. To help the book stay closed, I want to use a piece of ribbon. Rather than just tying the ribbon around the entire book, I'm making a small pocket in the spine of the book so the ribbon never gets lost. Just like I did with the paper flower and a wire stem, I'm making 2 slices with my X-Acto knife and poking the ribbon through the little slice. To keep the ribbon from sliding around, I'm adding a little white glue on the inside. To speed things along, I dried the white glue with my heat gun until my thumb got too hot. I found a solution for decorating the back of the book instead of the front. I found the original plant the leaf came from and harvested one. I'm adding the leaf and flower decor to the front instead. Now the book will be able to sit flat on a table. The inspiration book says journal on the front, and I don't have any printed words that say journal, so I tore a little scrap of paper and I'm writing it with a pencil. I don't have any lace that's small enough to fit on the spine, so I'm cutting a small part of this larger piece of lace to add some detail. The white lace looks pretty stark, so I'm adding some color with some chalk pastels. To give it a finished look, I folded the ends over inside of the spine. I was initially thinking of lining the inside of this book with this newsprint paper, but at the last second I decided to use tissue paper instead. The newsprint may be too thick and may make the book too difficult to close, and I like the texture of the tissue paper because it makes it look like handmade paper. I'm lining the inside of the book because I want to add the pages before I add more details to make sure the book doesn't get too thick to close. When it came time to glue in the pages, I was worried they might not stay, so I decided to sew them in instead. I chose thread as close in color as I could to the lace on the outside, but I wish I had sewn them first and then covered up the stitches with the lace. I added just a couple stitches to each page and used a simple stitch of coming from the back of the book through the front. I started with the center page and then added a page on each side. Before I pulled the stitches completely tight, I added some glue along the back to help hold the pages. To make sure the thread never comes loose, I glued it along the spine and let the excess hang out of the bottom. I'm opening up all of the pages to make sure they don't dry stuck together with glue. I wrapped the book in some paper to keep my clip from denting it and left it to dry overnight. The book is dry and I'd like to add some details around the edges of the pages using this brown marker. Before trying it on the book, I tested it on this discarded page I removed from the book earlier to make sure it would look nice. I'm also adding some marker around the paper cutouts I added and any other pieces of paper I add to the pages from now on. I'm adding more details to the pages, starting with a bookmark. I'm making a bookmark with a flap that goes over the page. I'm cutting the three-sided rectangle that forms the flap first, and then I cut the shape of the bookmark out after, so I don't have to hold a tiny piece of paper to cut a flap. To create a little space in the flap so it can go over a page, I'm bending the flap outward and bending it over the end of my X-Acto knife. When I add the bookmark to the page, it's patterned on one side, but it's white on the back. To cover the white tab, I'm adding a little paper cutout. So now the bookmark is patterned on one side and has a little charm for the top of the page on the other side. If your bookmark has a bit of the wanderlust, you can always glue it in place or use a little tacky wax. The two pages in the middle of the book are front and center, but they're really plain, so I'm adding more detail. I left the tail of the bird hanging off of the page, but it's a little flimsy, so I'm adding some super glue to make it stronger so it doesn't rip off in the future. This newsprint page has a really cute pig, so I'm cutting that out to make another pocket for the book. I'm gluing the right side of this pocket to the ribbon trim I added on the page because it creates a little space so I can add something to it. I'm making a really simple bow to decorate the flap I just created by layering 2 pieces of thread, making a large bow and pulling the tails until the bow is tiny. This is what you see in the edited video, but this is reality. I'm not sure of the full name of the company since it's cut off, but there is an itsy bitsy W on this wallpaper and it's too cute to not add it to the book. For a little texture peeking over the top of the book, I'm adding a small piece of trim behind the front cover. To tie the ribbon and close the book, you can hold it shut with a clip while you tie a bow.